Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice podcast. My name is Elle. I am back again to read some Law of One material and share my opinions upon it. So today I'm I found a specific quote where they mention, where they're talking about sort of the difference between maybe fascism versus communism. And, in our politics, there's a lot of those ideas floating around right now, and a lot of accusations about things being fascist or communist, etc., etc. I just thought we would talk about that because I find it actually pretty interesting that Ra mentions both of those things in this one quote. So, without further ado, let's get into it. You can find links to this information at the1infinitecreator.com. That's my website where I have links to the LL research material who provides us all of this for free. So, today's quote is from the raw material, session 65.7, and it begins. The ideal of freedom from the so-called invading force of either the controlled fascism or the equally controlled social common ownership of all things would stimulate great quantities of contemplation upon the great polarization implicit in the contrast between freedom and control. And then they go on a little bit later. In this ongoing struggle, the light of freedom would burn within the mind-body-spirit complexes capable of such polarization. Lacking the opportunity for overt expression of the love of freedom, the seeking for inner knowledge would take root. End of quote. Ra, the Law of One. So just for the record, is session 65.7. But yeah, just for the record, I shortened that up a little bit just because there was a lot of other talk about other things. But I just sort of, took the parts that were pertinent to what I wanted to talk about. So, with this, you can see that right away they talk about freedom versus control. So I know that you've probably heard me talk about that quite a lot because honestly, it is sort of how I use, what would you say? It's sort of the compass that I use to discern in my everyday life, whether something may be considered, in quotations, good or bad, right? I'm on the service to others path, I feel, which is, I'm out here seeking to help myself, but to serve others at the same time. And, realizing that we are one and we are essentially the same entity, the same being, and there's no need to manipulate you for the sake of serving me. I would be better off to, serve myself the best that I know and at the same time serve others. And there's just that beautiful solving of the paradox. Okay, so that's sort of how the compass, I say, as I use to discern, where basically I'm just looking at things and saying, okay, is this free or is this a control mechanism? And at the same time, I don't want to be so strict about my definitions and like if I see something that may seem controlling, at the same time I need to employ some wisdom here in that I can't just be throwing out generalizations because generalizing is, well, I think they say in the raw material, generalizing is dangerous. You may be able to generalize just for the sake of communicating a concept, but there's always going to be the extreme ends of the concept which don't fit into your generalization. So anyways, maybe you get what I'm saying here. Just to take it with a grain of salt is another way of saying this. So let's just sort of reread the beginning of that again. The ideal of freedom from the so-called invading force of either the controlled fascism or the equally controlled social common ownership of all things would stimulate great quantities of contemplation upon the great polarization implicit in the contrast between freedom and control. Okay, so the invading force, they're just sort of speaking about our future. They can't see our future, but they can see potential futures. And, there is a potential where we either have sort of a controlled fascism or a social common ownership of all things, which would be communism. I think what I wanted to bring up in this is that this material is spiritual material, and it then will attract compassionate people. And so what I think is that compassionate people will sort of naturally be wanting to lean towards communism, the common ownership of all things. If we're one, why would it not make sense that we should share things? Why would it not make sense that everything should be shared equally? And that makes sense when you say it, but then when you go to put it into practice, it turns into what's called communism, in which case very strong and strict control measures must be taken in order to measure every bit of everything, so that it must be then calculated and divided up and shared equally amongst everyone. Whereas there's sort of that is a controlled ownership. Okay, now let me just throw another thing at you, which I think that would maybe be the more ideal concept, which is that everybody is free to do as they will and as they please, and that will mean that there will be inequality, right? So this means that there will be some possibly poor people and some people who will have more resources than others. However, what my opinion has been for a long time, and honestly it's partially why I even started this Law of One Instagram page, was that I realized that free will is extremely important in these equations. And so although it may make sense for me to go out and want to lobby my government to be more communist and to tax more people, et cetera, to share with others, that is what I sort of leaned to at the beginning. But then I realized that is sort of lacking wisdom, because you're just trying to use the state to control other people to do what you think is right. What I did was that I decided the only thing I can really do is encourage people to be charitable, encourage people to see this unity and this oneness, and in their free will choose to serve others. I mean, it just honestly can't be much more simple than that. I was at first, as a sort of recently graduated person, definitely falling into that trap of wanting to push for communist ideals, only later to realize that I'm pushing for the state to control other people to do what I think is right. So even though what I think is right obviously feels right, that doesn't mean that other people will always think that what feels right to them is what you should do, and what you feel is right is what they should do. So although that may also seem like also a very idealistic thing, that I just think that everyone in the world would be charitable, I do honestly think that is the way forward, that is the most fair for everybody involved. And that is that, through private charity, we can help each other. And I mean, even then, like, you can do very similar things that the government can do, just doing it freely. Instead of taking taxes from somebody, mandating that from them, you can instead, create a group where everyone is in on that cause, and they, have abundance to share towards lifting up whatever they feel needs to be lifted up. And honestly, then the money tends to get spent better that way. There's a lot less bureaucracy. We don't have to pay the people to measure, and we don't have to pay the people to collect. And there's just all these extra things in there, which I'm sure I don't want to get into, because this is about spirituality in a way, and this isn't about economics. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off topic. But the idea is once again, whether obviously I'm sitting here telling you kind of why communism sucks, and I just don't think that I need to tell you why fascism sucks. Fascism obviously is bad, right? So they sort of define fascism as they call it like right-wing authoritarianism, and I would call sort of communism very similar, just left-wing authoritarianism. So if you ever have seen a political compass, it is up, down, left, and right. So hopefully I got this right, but I believe, authoritarian is up, libertarian is down, and then you have political left and political right. So you can still be right-leaning or left-leaning in your politics, but are you authoritarian or libertarian? And authoritarian means that, like, you sort of demand that other people do as you sound, or as the majority sees fit, I suppose. Whereas if you're more libertarian, it would be more like, hey, I have my politics and I feel this is right, and you may feel something else is right, and I just think that we should both be able to decide that, that you should decide what you feel is right. I should decide what I feel is right. I respect your opinion to think differently. Have a great life. Have a great day. Okay, so let's just read the last part of the quote, see if it stimulates any thoughts here. In this ongoing struggle, the light of freedom would burn within the mind-body-spirit complexes capable of such polarization. Lacking the opportunity for overt expression of the love of freedom, the seeking for inner knowledge would take root. Okay, so here I feel like they're just saying that, in the case that in our future either we do have some sort of fascism or communism, doesn't really matter, that will be a control mechanism within our life. And so therefore, in the ongoing struggle, the light of freedom would burn within the mind, body, spirit complexes, within the people capable of such polarization. So it's basically just saying that, if you within your heart feel that you are somebody who wants to be free and can appreciate free will and can appreciate freedom and other people having the right to make, their own free choices, then if you are put within a control structure, that will automatically make you want even more freedom. Like it'll honestly just help you in polarization. So even when the control mechanisms are sort of creeping upon us, I mean, sometimes we can sort of just be grateful for the fact that, thank God that we're able to see that this is happening and that we're not just playing along with it. At least I have the discernment to feel that freedom is important and I do not want to be part of these control structures. And so, there's a lot of thinking and contemplating and life lessons and life decisions within my life that I have to consider, which I wouldn't have to consider if I was just going along with it, not thinking about freedom. So that would be, as they say here, capable of such polarization. Are you capable of thinking these thoughts? Do you even want to? And it's fine, right? Everyone polarizes at their own rate. Everyone will progress at their own rate. Nothing is known. There is no time to make a decision in. You have infinite time. All right, so, I don't want to go off on too many different tangents of economics. Just once again highlighting here the essence of control versus freedom. And Raw says in other places, which just keeps coming up in my mind because I keep seeing in the news how they're trying to vilify people who want to be free. But basically, oh man, I should have looked it up. But the quote is something about, people who are not free will see those people who are free and just automatically deem that freedom as evil. But they don't actually see that within the freedom, there's the potential for, polarization of either good or evil. So within freedom, you have the free will to be good or evil. But most people who are not free will just see you being free as evil. So, you need to understand that because it's really easy to be othered. There's a lot of groupthink going on right now. You don't fit in with the group. You've automatically been othered and you feel like, oh no, I don't fit in. But that's okay because you're just trying to be free. You're trying to be a free thinker. That doesn't even mean that you have to be correct in what you're thinking. You are just, taking the risk of being vulnerable and not just going along with what everyone thinks and saying, you know what, I'm going to figure this out myself. And within that, that's scary. And other people will say, you're silly. You should just follow along. And they'll call you sort of evil in a way, and some of them will, some of them won't, but, that's going to happen to you, and I would just want to mention that it's tough being othered. It's the group, wanting to fit in with the group is one of sort of the biggest pressures that there is. So I suppose just implore some wisdom and know that it is not necessarily easy thinking for yourself, especially with the group pressure and media and social media being so strong, reinforcing the groupthink ideas. So there we go, you guys. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. And if you enjoy this podcast, give me a like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. And yeah, I appreciate all your guys' support and kind words with this podcast and supporting me on Patreon and all those other things. So once again, thanks for listening. You guys have a wonderful rest of the week. Should be back on Friday with another podcast. Take care.